All right, so I was playing with FL Studio tonight for about the second time ever, and here's the beat I made. So it's influenced by Yandere, obviously, if you're reading the sample names. And I just wanted to actually compare it because I remade the beat in Ableton Live also. So here's the Ableton beat. Yeah, so I think I got it sounding pretty close, and that's just because the beat's pretty much just samples and not actually that much synthesis. And so it's pretty easy to make it sound close if it's just samples without a lot of processing. But I wanted to make a video to kind of compare the workflows a little bit because I actually find this pretty interesting to learn about how FL Studio works with its patterns concept. And I'm pretty new to it. I mean, I've been using Ableton for a very long time, and I'm very used to its workflows, but I'm actually finding that I like FL Studio quite a bit for some things that it does differently. So I'll just dive right into it. FL Studio has this different conceptual model where it has this concept of a playlist, and then there's patterns, and patterns can be arranged in the playlist, but patterns can have different channels within them. And these are kind of like the different tracks that you might have in Ableton, but the difference is that there's no correlation to the arrangement with a channel. Like in Ableton, your tracks are kind of directly linked to a specific lane in the arrangement, and only stuff lives there. And then there's the exception of clips you can have in session view. But in FL, you have your channel, which is kind of like a track, except that it's kind of decoupled. But actually the main point I want to make is that I really like this channel rack. I think it's super cool, and it works very well with how I like to make music, which is kind of in a first creative phase, where in the first section I'm just trying to build and add layers and make it sound good, and I'm not really concerned about mixing. I'm not really concerned about leveling too much. I'm not really concerned about arrangement. I'm just trying to make a cool loop with a lot of layers. And I find that this channel rack is actually pretty ideal for that, especially if you're trying to combine different drum sounds, but also melodic sounds, and combine them into kind of one package. I actually really like how there's this alternate view where you can have a sequencer view, and channels can also optionally have like a piano MIDI view also. And you can use whatever is best. Like sometimes you just really want to drag in a percussion sound, like a kick or something, and you're not interested in making a melody out of it. So it's more than enough to just kind of click in some stuff. But if you ever want to, it's really easy to go into the piano roll and then take it from there. That's super cool. Ableton totally doesn't have this concept. So Ableton Live has, well, the closest thing it has is the session view, which actually, to be honest, I don't really use very much at all, like if ever. I actually only use arrangement view, basically. But the closest thing to that channel rack is Ableton's session view, where it's kind of a separate area apart from the arrangement. So just like in FL, this channel rack is a bit of a prototyping area that is separate from your actual playlist where you're going to actually arrange the final song. It's more of a playground. The conceptual equivalent in Ableton is the session view, where you have all your tracks, so kind of like your channels, and then you can have different clips in the session view. So each of these clips would correspond to what we're seeing to the right of the channel here. And both DAWs have a pretty cool feature where actually you can turn on this thing called loop mode in FL. And I actually don't. Okay, I actually don't know why it's not appearing. Oh wait, maybe maybe I have to zoom all the way over. Okay, I don't know FL well enough to understand why this isn't working. Advanced looping. Okay, this is why. So FL has this feature where so you're in your channel rack and you're making your loop, and kind of by default, all of the channels in the rack loop at the same length. And this can be inconvenient sometimes if you have one channel that just has a much simpler loop that you just want, and you don't want to program the MIDI that's the same all the way out. You just want to loop a smaller section and have that naturally align with the rest of the longer loop. And you can do this using this loop mode feature, and you can drag these things over here. I'm not going to do that right now. Ableton has the same thing. Your clips in the session view can be of different lengths, and these meters here along will illustrate the different progressions of your. I can actually try to show you. Actually, so I need to make some free space, and then I'll just. You can see these different pies. So in this case, it's a bad example because every clip is exactly the same length because I dragged it in from the arrangement view where I made this. But clips can have different lengths, and Ableton will automatically kind of just loop them and make them realign. But that's not really the important part of what I want to talk about. But the basic idea is just comparing these playground areas, channel rack versus session view. And the similarities are that in both DAWs, it's separate from the arrangement. In both DAWs, you can have varying lengths. In FL Studio only, you can have this mixed view where you can see all your tracks on a kind of global level at once. This does not really exist in Ableton. The session view is limited to, I mean, you do have this kind of global view, but you do not see the details of the clip. You can only see them one at a time. Although actually maybe I'm totally wrong. There's a limitation though. You can only edit up to 9 clips. So maybe I guess I'm actually totally wrong. Well, I'm kind of wrong, so kind of wrong, kind of not. So I think this is a little bit better in FL Studio. But the point is, in FL Studio, you have this global view of your prototyping area. So that this pattern would be called a scene in Ableton. A scene refers to this whole row. And FL allows you this nice global view where you can actually program in things very quickly across different tracks all at once. If you want to jump into any particular track, you can do so. And then, okay, I don't know how to get back without clicking this, but then you click that and get back. And I actually really like this global view a lot. I find it so intuitive to just have my pattern playing, and I can quickly add some more kicks if I want them. I can remove them. And then, I can quickly add a kick, then add a clap, right, with just 2 clicks right next to each other. I can't really do that in Ableton very well. If I wanted to have such a quick, if I wanted to do the same thing where I'm kind of modifying the kicks, and then I want to modify the claps, I need to first find my claps, click on the clip, and then edit them. That's a bit less fluid of a workflow. That said, Ableton is a little bit different because the actual kind of more proper way to do this in Ableton is to use a drum rack where you have like a lot of different, I'm not going to fill this in right now, but if you were to actually do this, each of these rows you could add a bunch of different drums to, well, maybe I can just quickly show you a pre-made drum kit that came with Ableton. It's not going to match these sounds, but here's the idea: is that you actually have all your drums in kind of one area. But the difference is that you cannot really easily take one of these drum channels and flip it out into a full piano roll where you can control the pitches easily. FL Studio allows you to do that. You start out with this very similar kind of drum rack thing, but if you ever want to, all you need to do is hit the piano roll and you immediately are brought into a piano roll. The drum rack is a bit similar, but you have that limitation where you can't bring them out into the pitched area. But yeah, so this would be a bit more of the way Ableton is meant to work, and it would allow you that kind of nice, quick drum editing, but it's not exactly the same because now you're all kind of working entirely within this one track. But anyway, so I was talking about how much I actually really like this channel rack view, and it, to a certain extent, yeah, you can't really do it in Ableton. As I just discovered, you can actually select a bunch of these clips, but as it says, you're limited to 8, which kind of sucks actually. So here I have 9, and like technically, yeah, you do kind of get this global view, but I don't love it. I find this pretty messy, and it's not exactly the same. This view is more comparable to if you actually go into the MIDI editor. Then you kind of get this messy view, but I think FL kind of does it better because it's very obvious which one you're in, and you can see the other tracks. I guess you kind of have this too, but maybe it's literally just the coloring, but it's kind of noisy. I mean, maybe it's, if there was more space, it'd be easier to see. And so in FL, you might, you can easily kind of see all your channels and select which one. Whereas in Ableton, you need to be kind of like, it's not quite as easy to search and find the one you want. So, yeah, so that's, they're kind of similar, but I'm actually kind of preferring FL for this because I find it just a bit cleaner. I find it easier to go find the one you want, jump to it. And I like this global view a lot. And so this is actually the reason I don't really use session view at all, because session view doesn't really work for what I want to do. So I'm just learning FL now for the first time, but this is actually kind of pretty nice for my workflow. And the way I work kind of for that workflow in Ableton is actually just using the arrangement view, which works well enough for me to have used it for like 6 or 7 years in this way. So now I'm actually in the arrangement view, and it's kind of similar to this channel rack thing. At least I use it kind of similar. What I like is that I still get my nice kind of global view of my quote unquote pattern, except the unfortunate thing is now it's no longer separate from my arrangement. This is just a part of my arrangement. And it's kind of, so it's built into my arrangement now, which is kind of unfortunate. So the way I actually tend to work is I will reserve an area of the arrangement for prototyping my quote unquote pattern. And then when I'm ready to actually do my arrangement, I'll jump over to some random unused area to the right and actually start to build things out. And then what I usually do is add like a begin and end locator once I'm actually done making my song. And then when I bounce it, I select this region and bounce it. That's where my song lives. And so there's this kind of weird separation between the actual production song area and kind of my sandbox playground clip areas. But that's how I work. It works okay. But yeah, this is actually much similar now to this channel rack thing. You can see all your different tracks or channels, and then you can see kind of the notes or pattern right next to them. And a difference, is that I can easily click things into the sequencer if they're drums, but right here it's not quite so easy. I need to double click, open up the MIDI editor, and go between them. Yes, I technically can also do this kind of thing, although I run into this limitation with the 8 tracks thing. But say I wanted to just edit my drums, yes, I technically can do this. It is possible. The inconvenient thing is that if I ever click a clip, I lose the selection. And if I wanted to go back to that view, I need to re-select it like this. That's kind of inconvenient. So I need to be kind of like constantly dragging this thing if I want to get back to that. But then technically I can have this kind of area where I can work on all the clips at once, but it's still not quite as convenient. I still need to be clicking between the different tracks to actually program in the notes for the track I want, whereas in FL I just kind of go between these, and I don't really switch focuses explicitly. So anyway, that's even though it's not quite as smooth as this FL Studio, it's been also fine enough, and I've worked with this successfully for years. So this is actually how I kind of emulate the channel rack concept in Ableton. And what's kind of cool with FL is that I can make one pattern and then I can make a totally new pattern and just start totally fresh with a similar kind of layout. I can just make a totally new isolated pattern. And yeah, the way I would do that is, I guess I would kind of, I would just duplicate everything and then make a new kind of de facto area of the arrangement for my new pattern, which is a bit hacky, but whatever, it kind of works. And yeah, I guess I can kind of go back and select. Yeah, I can kind of browse the patterns, which is pretty cool too. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, there's a lot of things about FL that I don't particularly love. Maybe it's just because I'm kind of new, but for one thing, I find that there are a lot of clicks and glitches that are, I think, just bugs in FL, a lot more than are in Ableton. And yeah, they're just clicks and glitches that happen when I interact with the UI, and also when loops restart. And I think that is just buggy coding in the audio engine. That's usually what causes these clicks. They're called dropouts in kind of the more technical audio programmer world. In Ableton, I know they put in a lot of work to avoid these. It is considered a very serious bug if there are dropouts, because it sounds bad especially for live performance. I think since FL Studio is not really meant for live performance, maybe they just consider it okay for dropouts to happen. But I do notice them a lot when just kind of clicking around. Maybe I can even trigger one. Okay, I wasn't able to do it easily with just some clicking around there, but I definitely have noticed it before when with loop boundaries and stuff like that. Anyway, other things that annoy me are I find that in both the playlist and in the MIDI editor, I tend to have to do pretty precise dragging, and it can be pretty easy to be slightly off the grid, although I think you can fix that with some settings here, but I encountered a few issues with that. But yeah, overall, I just wanted to kind of make that comparison with the channel rack, because I actually find this pretty interesting to compare. Otherwise, I'll quickly just compare how the two beats are made. Most of it is not really that interesting. I exported the MIDI from the FL project into the Ableton project, and the only differences are I'm using the grand piano that comes with Ableton instead of the Flex piano plugin, and I remade the 3XOSC synth in Ableton using Operator. So here's how the so that's 3XOSC with just square, sine, an octave down and 2 octaves down. And I remade that in Ableton. So square, and then I don't actually understand the chorus controls that well, but I made it at 1 and 0.5, and the chorus is at 2. So I think it sounded pretty similar. Then just some reverb and delay, just like reverb and delay here. And they're pretty similar. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, overall, I'm definitely still a beginner with FL, and I don't really understand the workflows that well. And I was very confused by the conceptual differences at first. But now that I understand the channel rack a bit better and the conceptual model behind patterns and the playlist, it makes more sense. One of the biggest things that I now know is that there are some very handy shortcuts like Command L for automatically assigning all the different channels in a pattern to different mixer strips. I was kind of doing this manually, and that totally, that was totally inconvenient. And I totally didn't understand how this software could be successful if everyone needed to do that all the time. But if I understand correctly, everyone is just using the Command L shortcut that automatically assigns every channel in a pattern to the mixer, assuming it's a blank channel. So I think it's pretty nice. I think it's pretty cool that you have some very minimal controls to do some very minimal leveling and panning just while you're kind of prototyping your beat or pattern, without going too far into the EQing and sound design. That's for later. And I find that it's a nice just conceptual workflow. Is that first you just kind of be a bit messy and creative in your channel rack, doing some light leveling, some very light mixing, and that messy creative time doesn't have any implication or bearing on your actual arrangement because it's a totally separate area, nor does it have any, kind of direct, you're not doing your real mixing at that point either. Once you're ready to, you can allocate everything to mixer strips and start doing the mixing, but it's kind of separate, whereas that doesn't quite exist in Ableton. So overall, I'm excited to try this a bit more.